Hi, I'm John, and in this video, we'll see how to create our first form in Figma. We're going to apply best practices, and we're going to review all the concepts we've been working on throughout this course to create our very first form. Today we're going to start, as always, from the inside out, from the smallest to the largest elements in groups. Our form consists of several different elements. For example, one of the most important are the labels, okay? So this will be a text label here. Alright, we have our label, and we also have our form field, which would be our input to begin with. Are you ready? Let's create our input field, which would be something like, for instance, your name. Okay, we have our input here, and we're going to create it with auto layout. So, by pressing Shift plus A, we now have our auto layout ready, along with our label. Okay, so, for this particular case, we are going to define this as a label, and this will function as an input field. Alright, we have our input, we have our label. Now let's group these two. In this case, this would be the placeholder, this would be our label, and this would be our input. Ready? So this would be something like a placeholder, and we're going to group it. So, well, in this case, we're going to add our variables. Here we'll put 0, a space of... So, for example, here we'll use an extra small size for our form. Alright, I'm going to set an initial width, and for this, we'll just set it to 0. Let's say this is the orientation of the auto layout. Our text label, for instance, we're going to set its color to primary. Our variable, let's say, for the placeholder, we are going to set its color to a base medium shade, for instance. So that is what we will do. We'll ensure our input element has a distinct border, let's say, with a particular border color. Excellent. And furthermore, that it possesses a border radius of M, for instance. Okay, in this specific case, I believe S. Alright? So now we have our label, and we also have our text, which is size M in this example. In this case, we can make it an extra small size. For example, that could be good, or even a small size. Excellent. So now we have our label, and we also have our input. We're going to select both of them. Shift plus A to create our auto layout, and this will be our initial group for the form. We'll simply name it a group. Alright, so this here marks the creation of our very first group. We can duplicate it to create another group. In this instance, it could be, for example, your email, okay? And we now have two groups, which are essentially two inputs, each with its own label and its corresponding placeholder fields. This would be the most basic, right? Always remember, fill and hug. In this case, the label should also be fill, or in the case of the label, it can also be hug content. There's absolutely no problem. It can certainly function effectively because the label, generally speaking, won't ever exceed the maximum width. Now, if the label is very long, my recommendation is fill. Now we're going to create other, more advanced inputs, like for example, the option inputs, which could be a rectangle for our checkbox. I'm going to instruct it to have a border. I'll conceal this part here, and then I'll set the border to precisely the border color. Alright, here we have our rectangle. And let's add the text. In this particular instance, I'm going to state that, for example, this is an option 1, alright? We have our option 1. I'm going to set this to the text color. Alright, and in this case, we have the ability to select it. Shift plus A, we have our auto layout. In this case, we can define a different line height. For example, 100%, not 960, but 100%, so it adapts. Alright, so now it's centered. We have our first option, which in this case, we're going to name it here instead of frame. We'll call it option. Ready? Here we are going to place the check mark here. And here we're going to put the option. The name of the option, text. Alright then. Now let's proceed to width. Remember here that this is going to be hug content. Instead of hug, we'll make it fill. Perfect, we have our option set. We have our block. Here, we can specify that the separation should be set to, for the spacing, XS. That works well here. We can tell it to have a specific width. Well, we already have that set up. Let's go ahead and duplicate this option here. Okay, for example, we'll have 1, 2, 3 options, maybe even 4 options. Let's select them. Hold down Shift and press A to apply auto layout, and then we're going to specify that this will be our option wrapper. Alright, we have our option wrapper. All of them are set to fill. Understood? A separation here could be excess. Excellent. So now we have our options, and what we're going to do is designate this particular element as an input field. Alright, so over here, this is an option wrapper, or rather an input. Shift A. We're going to label this as an input. Perfect. We've got our label, and we've got our input. Shift A. This would be another group. So we have our group, and here we have it with an XS spacing. Here we're going to use this, which also has an XS space. Let's get everything organized now. Here we have an extra small space already in place. Ready? So, over here we have. We're going to set these values to 0, 0, 0. And now everything is perfectly organized. We have our designated text label, which for instance would be text options label. Okay, so here we have our options, in this case for labels. We can also create, in this case for a checkbox. We can also do it for radio buttons, and we'll also be creating a select, which is an element very similar to our nav menu. So let's follow the same example. I'm going to duplicate this group now. Alright, we've got our text label right here. Here, for example. This is going to be a select. This option. Got it? Over here we can actually add. Let's try to find an icon over here. Copy this icon, and we're going to place it here inside the auto layout of our option. We're going to say that this is centered and that this one is set to auto. Alright, so here we have our option, our arrow, our pointer arrow, all set and ready to go. And we're going to add the items, which is exactly the same way we did it with our nav menu in the submenus. So it's a very similar process. To do that, I'm going to copy these texts, option. Alright, we have our options. And I'm going to group them together. Therefore, in this specific instance, I'll proceed with it directly. I don't need to create one nested within another, because currently, in CSS, there isn't an option that works across all browsers to properly style select options. So in this case, we have our select and our options right here. For instance, this one will be an option select. These are select options. Alright, and I'm going to take these select options and place them directly inside my input field. Alright, we have it here now. We're going to use the position, the one that ignores auto layout, which in this case would be absolute position. We're going to place it here underneath, for this. Well, I'll apply some styles, even though we already understand that it's not truly viable. Content, I'm going to position a space S here, followed by another space S. Okay, for example, a fill with a certain value, like this one here. For example, this one with a border radius of XS. Alright, we already have it here. Yes, we already have it here. This when combined with a separation of XS. And there we have our options. As we can clearly see, it's neatly placed within our group. If we want to hide it, we just hide it, and it's no longer shown. But when we want to display it to the client or our developer so they can understand what option is inside the select, we can enable and show it. Alright, so here we have it, our input. We can also continue by creating a text area, for example. Now, our input would already have a minimum height. And well, finally, once we've gathered all our essential menu elements and groups, we can then proceed to incorporate our button as well. I'll go to Assets, Button. Button primary, for example, this one. Alright? I'm going to go ahead and hide this for now. There, now I'll select everything. Shift plus A. For this one, we normally use hug content for the width, but here I'm going to use fill so it takes up the entire width of the form. Well, everything's responsive, adapting well. Our form here, it's a complete form now. And we have our different groups right here. I can give this group a gap, for example of M. This is good. Or L, you guys can organize it. We can also give it some padding, and we can give it a border. We can now organize all our designs, alright? This is how we create our form, applying best practices and auto layout. Remember that if you do it with best practices, we'll be able to, for example, in this case, go here to forms. For instance, in my forms, over here, there are various options, each already equipped with its specific labels, so you can simply copy and paste them directly into Bricks Builder, complete with their unique styles, the correct element type, and indeed all the essential labeling and precise markup. Alright, that's everything. I truly hope this video has been helpful to all of you. Now you should know how to create a form using best practices. Keep advancing, practicing, and fully internalizing these concepts of auto layout and best practices. Well, see you in the next video where we will continue practicing. Goodbye.